Hey everybody, welcome back to the TriSummit. This session is called the Return to Racing, and our distinguished panel, USA Triathlon board member and race director Gabriela Gallegos, CEO of Challenge North America Bill Christy, and his senior regional director from Ironman, Mr. Paul Huddle. Hey, Paul, let's start with you. You guys were able to do Ironman 70.3 Arizona. You were able to do Ironman Florida. Talk a little about, in this age of COVID, how you're able to pull those events off.
Sure. I think like everybody here, we've been working on plans, since March, since this thing hit. So I think everybody was well prepared for this. We've been fortunate because we have a great global medical team, and we have, a lot of resources to draw from. We worked with the CDC and the WHO to establish the guidelines that we used. But of course, I don't think any of us knows exactly what's going to happen when the rubber meets the road. And I'm making that reference because I just heard that regarding Daytona. I love that. And anyway, so when we finally got to the point where the pandemic conditions were such that they could permit the race, even in Tempe, Arizona, the things that you deal with from community to community are very different. The things in California and the rules and the state versus the county versus the cities is very different to what we experience in my region in Utah and Arizona. In the case of Arizona was, the state itself was not under a mask mandate. They were under no gatherings of 50 or more. But they also mandated that the cities could determine whether or not to be under a mask mandate. Tempe was under a mask mandate, and pandemic conditions and hospitalizations were at a level that they felt they could consider a race. So they looked at our plans. They were confident with what we said we were going to do. And, we were fortunate that we had a great relationship with them, and they were working with us to make sure that we adhere to those plans. So, it just really, I think for all of us, it was a case of everyone feels like we could safely do it. And it was getting the opportunity to be able to prove that. And that's what we really wanted, and that's what we ended up getting. And it was really, we, on the one hand, it was really important for us and the brand and for Ironman, but I think more importantly, it was important for the entire industry. Everybody's really suffered through this thing. I know that, we lost over half of our full-time team in our San Diego office. We lost over half, we were an office of about 20, and we're now an office of eight. So it's really tough on the entire industry and all of our vendors. So, at the end of the day, we were able to host the event, and all of the plans that we put in place came off really well. And most importantly, no one knew what the public reaction was going to be or what the athlete reaction was going to be. Were they going to comply? And it was really heartening to see that everybody enthusiastically complied. And I think that just shows that everybody really wants to get back to racing in a safe way. That's the one thing. Nobody wants to risk safety. So
right. So Gabriela, you sort of wear a couple of hats. One, you're USA Triathlon board, and USA Triathlon, I think, suffered a loss of like $8 million this year, and they're selling the building. At the same time, you're a local race director. Talk a little bit about the impact really from both sides for you.
Yeah, so as a local race director, so I produce six events annually, 5 in El Paso and 1 actually in Tucson. And so last year we did not have live racing, and that was kind of a decision that was made. Initially, it was let's postpone, let's see. And then it became okay, this is not going to be workable. And so we need to offer certainty. And I think, as all of us know, the only true certainty would have been cancellation. And that was not something that we were willing to do. So we, kind of did the pivot that we saw around the country to virtual events. And thankfully, we're able to produce, I believe we ended up producing about 7, ranging in participation from 250 up to about 1,000, depending on the event. So those were good and healthy, and got people motivated toward a goal, and brought people in who might not have ordinarily been racing, even, gave them a little taste of what that might feel like. So that was successful in that sense. We are now planning for a live race at the end of April in El Paso. And that one's going to be the, kind of a limited number of people live plus a virtual component so that it, offers that backup and overflow, one, to keep the numbers down, but also if there's anything that does change that affects our ability to produce the live event, we have kind of that fallback that is already in place and structured to go. So that's kind of what that's going to look like. We've had a couple of specific challenges because we have not had, city pools open all year and they remain closed. And so because we don't have open water, we, decided to not do the swim portion. So everything's a little bit different this year. There's going to be a bike run and a run, and then the virtual, can have the swim component because there's, very limited, like the Ys are open or, there's a couple of pockets of open, available water space, but it's really tough. Nationally, we've seen, I think Florida and Arizona have really been the ones leading the charge with, kind of showing how it's done and what it can look like with varying levels of restrictions. But each of us are facing, slightly different philosophies or different local restrictions, different statewide philosophies. And we're having to really design plans that are going to meet all of those requirements while still, in keeping with, a fun race, right? So there's this balance of making sure that we're, doing everything that is still promoting health and public health. And so we want to do it as safely as possible. But we also want to be able to give people, the challenging and rewarding experience that they're looking for.
And from a national perspective, with obviously the dollars that come in for USA Triathlon are from people racing and from
Absolutely.
Annual memberships and daily licenses. And that basically dried up entirely. So how does USA Triathlon pivot, not knowing what's happening this year?
Yeah, so USA Triathlon has faced a lot of challenges, but really has done an incredible job of looking to its audience, looking to motivate kind of in the same way that race directors have with some virtual events, drawing on its membership and using that to talk to sponsors about how you can reach, this audience, even if there's not racing. So I think that there's been a lot of creative ways to move forward, which has been really helpful. But I mean, it's tough, right? And I think a lot of people, especially, people who might be, casual participants, don't realize the next level ramifications. So they're not thinking about the vendors that we all depend on for shirts and medals and kind of what it looks like for their business, and then what it means for USA Triathlon when there's, if there's not racing, maybe you don't think you need an annual membership because you pretty much use that to race, and so, right. So kind of the rewards, it's redefining what that value proposition looks like, I think, for USA Triathlon and its members. And for race directors, it's, there's these next level consequences that are not quite as visible to kind of the everyday athlete that we've kind of been seeing over the past year.
Hey, and Bill, you guys, when you announced Challenge Daytona in December, and you're going to have age group races and pro races and bring athletes in from all over the world, I'm sure a lot of people were skeptical that, is this going to happen? Talk a little bit about the challenge of what you were dealing with, because I'm sure a lot of people were thinking there is no way this is going to happen.
Well, I think first and foremost, I want to go on record and say I renewed my USAT card for 2 years. So I know that's not a lot, but I'm trying to do my part, and I have faith. Yeah, we brought in athletes from countries all over the world for the pro pool by itself. We're lucky enough that NASCAR, as you know, went back to racing real early on, and we're the first sport to do it. So we had the fortunate exposure to their protocols, and that gave everybody a level of confidence that, look, if they can put 25,000 people in the stands, we ought to be able to put 5,000 people in a 888-acre facility. And I think the protocols we used, how we did it, and the biggest function for me was to watch the athletes be responsible, be respectful, want to race, understand the implications, there weren't many people you walked around, you had to say, hey, please put your mask on. That didn't happen here. So I've got to really give credit to the people that want to come to these events. We had some pretty stringent guidelines. As you know, we put all the pros in one hotel. We kept them there. They did have training assignments. They had to schedule for pool swims. We had private pools set up for them. We were lucky enough to have those vehicles through the local YMCAs. They were just awesome to work with. And it was the little things. It was the little things that made me feel comfortable saying, okay, we've got enough PPE to be able to hand out a disposable mask for everybody who walks into transition. We had people on bullhorns, and we had enough volunteers to walk through a very long line of people waiting to do a rolling start into the water, saying, please social distance. But they were respectful. At the end of the day, our athletes wanted to race, and they were respectful. They did a fantastic job with the protocols. If somebody did pop coming in from a temperature, we knew that 98% of the time that was a function of them putting their mask on that had been sitting on their dashboard. So we followed the protocols. We had an event that we did limit certain people to very specific viewing areas. We brought the Jumbotrons in to try and enhance that experience. And we're fortunate that unlike a lot of races where people can walk out of a cafe and walk right up to the fencing where an athlete's running or riding, that doesn't happen. So we had a high degree of confidence because there was only one way in and one way out. We consider ourselves lucky, unbelievably lucky. But at the end of the day, I've got to go back to the athlete. I've got to go back to them wanting to race, wanting to be safe, adhering to the protocols, and being what we would expect people in our community to be.
So, Paul, the other part of this is, you sort of wear a couple different hats. One, you've got triathlons with a couple thousand people. Then you have something like a rock and roll marathon with 25,000 people. And when you're talking to these different states, is there a different response on the different because of the magnitude of these events you're doing? Huddle, you're muted, homeboy.
Yeah, I just noticed that. I'm like, I'm muted. That was good. Someone had to do it. Might as well have been me. Yeah, that's obviously a numbers game when you're talking about, going from 1, 2, 3,000 athletes to 10, 20, 30,000 athletes. And we came very close and I think have robust plans in Nashville. That was going to be our first rock and roll. It was going to be last year, but it's sort of, you guys know this because I'm sure like all of us, we watch it so closely in terms of the phases that the various states are in. But the timing we ran out of time. Had it been a week earlier, we would have had that event. And I think we were all, really excited to be able to implement the protocols and record it and get the images and the video like we did at Arizona so that we could sort of have this proof of concept in hand. But we still have those plans in place and we're continually refining them. But it's the same as what Bill and Gabriela have referred to with their races. It's just on a much bigger scale. You have the plans. It's all about numbers and spacing and timing. And, we still believe that, when the time comes, and it will come eventually, we're going to be implementing those plans at some level or another.
Are you hearing from the athletes? I mean, a lot of us were thinking, will athletes want to come back? Will they be like, hey, I'm just going to sit back and wait until I know everything's safe, that everybody's had 2 shots? Or are you seeing that, man, I got to get back. This is part of my sanity.
Yeah, I think, and I think Bill and Gabriela would probably attest to this because they're probably experiencing the same thing. I think the demand is there. I think people want to get back to racing. I think one of the things that I researched very early on, and I'm still constantly researching, is proof of transmission in outdoor environments, and it's incredibly low. I think the number I've seen is between 18 and 20 times more dangerous to be in an indoor scenario, even distanced and masked. So in an outdoor scenario, it's incredibly safe. I'm not saying that transmission doesn't happen, but it's on such a tiny percentile of what indoor transmission rates are. So that's what gives me personally a lot of confidence in the plans that we have. When you're distancing folks at least 6 feet, when everyone is wearing face coverings, when you have enhanced hygiene available everywhere, I think you're going to have a pretty safe race. And I don't know that anyone would disagree that doing an event like that in an outdoor scenario isn't safer than going to your local grocery store or Walmart or big box store or whatever. And that's, I think, really critical. The hard thing for us, and we've been fighting this battle out here in California, is trying to get the state to give us guidelines. All of these other industries have guidelines. I believe that we've created the guidelines to be able to give to them and say, here you go, this is our start. Feel free, like all of our communities will, modify them to suit their needs, and let's go. We believe that we can do this safely. And I think, I looked at the beaches this last summer in Southern California. We were certainly more distanced at our event than the beaches in Oceanside and Del Mar and, here in North County. So I'm sure there are other scenarios like that, but again, I feel like it's safe. We just need to have the protocols and guidelines. And then when pandemic levels and hospitalizations are at a level that it's safe to bring them back, we should be able to do that.
So Gabriela, one of the things that I don't think people talk enough about is I think the margins in triathlon are pretty small to begin with in terms of profitability. If the city is saying, okay, you used to put on an event with 750 people, but now you can only have 400, but you still have the same cost for the roads, you still have the same hours that you can put the roads blocked off. I'm worried that a lot of race directors won't make it. If they have to come back and with less numbers, will triathlons be able to, will some of them be able to survive?
It's a big challenge, and that numbers game is exactly why, I think you're going to see these hybrid events that are going to be, how it needs to move forward, both for logistics, right, to make sure that you're controlling the numbers and, maybe people aren't traveling, those sorts of things, but also for the costs. So if you have a smaller pool to be able to pay, each of those expenses, you need to try to, include more somewhere. One of the other challenges that we're seeing, that is in line with that, is that we're not going to be allowed to have spectators. So that means no expo, that means no sponsors on site, that means, a very different kind of offering for our sponsors because they can't be there, and have kind of physical contact with our participants. So there's a lot of those sorts of things. I am in a good position with this first event that the city of El Paso is a major sponsor. And so they are continuing that and kind of even, increasing that to some extent to help us with traffic control and, rentals and that sort of stuff. So it's a good test for us to see, like, how will this work with a smaller number? What does that do to potential sponsorships? Does that change whether or not they feel that they're going to get the value out of that event? So it is a challenge, but I think a lot of people don't realize the level of costs of closing roads. And so when you've got small community events.
No idea.
It is just by far the largest expense, So I think what we might see is race directors looking to venues that are much easier to control, that are maybe within an environment like a park or, something that will take you off of having to do, the traffic control equipment and police expenses, or somehow, kind of modify it. There's really just no other way to cover the costs.
No. So speaking of that, Bill Christy, talking about venues that are controlled, being on a racetrack, and when I first saw the Daytona Speedway, I'm thinking this is a festival waiting to happen. Rock concert, triathlon, duathlon, aquathon, aquabike. Is that where you're heading? Because you do have that control environment, and in a lot of cases, you don't need to be blocking roads.
Yeah, no question. Two things. First and foremost, I want to be in the cone business, right? For anybody on this call who does not want to be on the cone business, boy, they've got it. I'm just amazed.
Huddle's got a few in his garage.
I think we all do.
Right? And back to your point, Gabriela, people have no concept of what it costs to put on a race. At least to the level that we are, and we know you guys put on a great quality race, both of you. And we are fortunate that we've got a contained environment. We've got an environment where we can offer multiple venues, road course, ovals with road course. Miami, you'll see a twist with us this year. We're actually putting the cyclists on the road course to make it a little more technical. Daytona was let's level out the playing field between the ITU folks and the middle distance and the long distance folks by making them stay down and narrow for a very long time. But to Bob's point, yeah, we're lucky enough that we can control that environment. And it does not mean that the expense associated with Kona Police goes away. But it is a controlled vehicle by which we at least know what our costs are going into a race, which being outside costs change daily. So my hat's off to both of you.
So, Paul, the other side of this, I don't think people recognize. It's one thing for the state to go, okay, you're going from this level to this level, and restaurants you can open up this weekend. When you're talking an event and you're talking lead times of 8, 10, 12 months, because it's like if they tell you today you can put on Oceanside in March, you can't do it, right? Talk a little bit about what the challenges of our particular industry for the race director to try to get some clarity on when you can open up registration for an event that's 6, 8, 10 months from now.
Well, I think you just said it. We're not like a normal business in that sense. You can't put things away and tidy them up and shut down and then boom, within a day reopen everything and have your customers coming back in. The event business is, as we all know, something that people need to plan for. And so when you register for an event, that you're usually doing that well in advance of that event. So that's what makes it really difficult. And I think that's what's been part of the biggest frustration for everybody, not just for us, as Gabriela alluded to, for the vendors who we're trying to plan this out with, for the venues that we're trying to plan with, for the permitting, and then of course for the athlete. And our goal is to make sure that we have safe events and that we're able to produce them and produce that great experience for that athlete. But that's been the biggest conundrum, is at what point do you have to, is it too iffy? I think if you look back, and this is one of the most difficult things that people need to understand, is what things look like in March were very different to what they started to look like in June. And then at the peak at that time in July. But then you could potentially see the things improving, and then what things look like in August, September, October were very different to what they looked like in January. So we're going through this roller coaster of case levels and hospitalizations that are really influencing what we're able to do or not do. And to your point, it makes it really difficult for everybody. I don't think there's any aspect of this, from customer to the event producer to the cities and permitting agencies and communities. Everybody's impacted. And I think someone said it really well early on in this, is people are going to have to get comfortable with this level of uncertainty. And it's not something that humans are great at, is being comfortable with uncertainty. Everybody wants to be able to schedule and have a plan. And it's just been really hard in that regard.
What were your learnings from the 70.3 Arizona that you were able to put on, and following all the COVID protocol? What did you guys come away with?
I think overwhelmingly it was just proof of concept. We had this plan, and we didn't know, for example, one of the big differences that we implemented, and that I think a lot of people are implementing now, it's you can see it even in grocery stores and things like this early on, is you can't just let everyone come at when they want to come. You need to schedule it out. So through the registration platform, we had people pick times that they were going to come and register, pick up their packet, and check in their bike. So it wasn't just, the normal, the schedule says expo and registration are open at 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'm just going to come somewhere in that window. No, you had to pick a time within an hour window, and it was first come, first serve. When that block filled up, then you had to pick another time. And so I think we were very leery of whether people would comply. But as Bill and Gabriela have said, people are overwhelmingly compliant and they want to do the right thing and they want to do it correctly. So we had zero problem with that. And in fact, I think if you talk to the customer, they had a much better experience through that registration process. They were able to arrive, go through screening, go through check in their bike, probably within 10 minutes. And then they could go to the expo and go to merchandise. You know, everything had markers for social distancing. So visually you knew where you needed to be relative to somebody else. And, you know, I think, but that was a surprise to us. And I wouldn't be surprised to see things like that scheduling of folks when they're going to come into registration and what have you. I believe that'll be around because I think customers really liked that. That was just one of the things, but there were a lot of lessons across the board.
Yeah, Gabriela, one of the things that I've seen out here in California is that I think our race directors who maybe felt competitive with each other, didn't really chat with each other. They've created a California coalition. Everybody's working together. It's like, listen, we have reasons to be working together. Have you seen that among, you know, from USA Triathlon itself and from in your community, that race directors maybe are talking more than they have in the past because you need each other?
Absolutely. So in fact, very good timing because the race director committee under USA Triathlon has really taken the lead on this more recently and just created these, you know, 4 kind of areas of the country that race directors can join and have that conversation. And so those have been rolling out. In fact, they were just kind of launched on the race director committee Facebook group, but you're seeing questions of how are you doing this? What does this look like? Even very specific, like what kind of signage was effective when you executed that event? Or are you thinking about alternatives for, mailing all the packets for virtual events or, whatever it might be? I think there's been a lot of cooperation and everybody's looking to each other to see what's working and what's not, so that you can put on the best event possible. So USAT was a great leader in terms of, developing the return to racing guidelines and releasing that very early so that, people could take a look at what we might be contemplating and what might be, coming. And then from there, I think race directors have been having conversations to see, even with virtual events, what worked, what didn't, what platforms did, what about, reporting times? Did you make them competitive? How'd you keep it fair? All of those kinds of questions. Some has been trial by fire, and then some has been, a trial by like watching that guy. So it's been helpful.
Bill, you guys put on Challenge Daytona in December, and now you got Challenge Miami coming up 12th, 13th, 14th of March. What did you take away from Daytona that you're incorporating into Miami?
Probably the biggest thing that we learned was that the app that we use for people for safety questionnaires, validation of their health, so many of those base components, people actually use the app. And they came prepared to our registration times, which is a fantastic point, prepared to move through registration quickly because they had their app and they had their QR code. We'll keep that. We just think that's something that really made a difference. I'm a firm believer that registration should be an enjoyable experience, not painful. And that's probably the biggest takeaway that we saw. We're going to integrate, and it'll be a continued component of what we at Challenge North America continue to do.
So as a guy who, all 3 of you were in this position, you guys were athletes, you were doing the sport of triathlon and then moved into sort of the organization part. Bill, what'd you learn from your days as an athlete that you've incorporated into organizing events?
Gabriela, you have to start on this one. It's the sequence, Gabriela.
Well, so I was very much recreational, right? And so, a little bit of a different experience, but, it should be enjoyable and it should be of a quality that somebody who has done a million races comes in, knows what to expect, has a great experience, and that a beginner still has access to understanding, right? They're not coming in and feeling, just kind of sideswiped with all the information, that sort of stuff. So I kind of look at both sides of that, like trying to bring in the beginners and then give the high quality experience. But you think very like soup to nuts, right? Like when they walk in, how does that look? How does it work? Where do you go? Is it going to be obvious? If we need them to stick within certain guidelines, how are those communicated? Different athletes are going to hear it different ways, right? So whether it's in an email, in printed documents, in a video, like it's not a one size fits all. And you start realizing that and trying to kind of, have belt and suspenders for every level. But really, because I think we've been athletes, you can think of it from that perspective and like, what questions would I have going into this? And what sorts of things would ease my worry, right? Like it would make me feel better that everybody had to, go through their checklist or, put their information into the app, that sort of stuff. But really, as an athlete, you're putting your hands, your body and your safety into the hands of that race director, right? To have designed a course that is going to keep you healthy and safe. And so thinking of it from that perspective, I think is probably the most helpful.
And for you, Bill?
I look at, and Bob, we've joked about the time it takes for me to get off a course. So we won't go back there because it's always entertaining. We do two things predominantly that I took away. I lost a friend, as you know, coming out of the water early on. So the USAT guideline is a great guideline. We go further than that with evac vehicles on property, off property. As I look back at my first race, which I had no clue what I was doing, where to go, what to do, the biggest experience we want our athletes to have is that regardless if it's your first time crossing that line or you have been a world championship in your age group, it is a world championship experience. And I would suggest to anybody who's interested, look at what that venue looked like, because we want everybody to feel like a world champion. And so our enthusiasm is around what do we have to do to create that experience, and at the same time, make sure everybody's safe, knows where they're going, knows what to do. We're lucky we've got the Checkered Flag Committee, which is a Daytona sponsored group that their job is to know where everything is. And Bob, as you remember, you walked in, there was an information desk and people in red coats that said, what are you looking for? How can I help you? Where can I direct you? Pass the signage. Have you enrolled in your app as yet? Have you gotten your QR code as yet? So making the experience where people were sitting around not having to try and figure things out is a huge, huge thing that I took away from my early days racing, where I was lucky I could find the water.
And Huddle, you're from a little different perspective, because you weren't just an athlete. You were a top pro for a number of years. And what did you, moving from the pro side and maybe not relating as much to the age group, or coming into the putting on events, how did that impact you?
Well, a couple things. First of all, Bill, nobody takes longer to get around a course than Bob Babbitt.
Exactly.
He arrives before any of the staff, and he's the last one out. So
you made my day.
I get the last beer. Always the last beer.
Don't feel like that at all. And in terms of being a pro, I think what Bob, what you didn't mention there is that everybody's a beginner at some point. Everybody's a timer at some point. So a lot of us came from single sport backgrounds, and what did I learn from being an athlete is the same thing we all learn when you get into triathlon, is that it's logistics. You know what I mean? You're not just putting on your running shoes and going out and running a 5K. You've got to consider so many other things. And Gabriela and Bill both alluded to this, is seeing an event as an organizer through an athlete's eyes is critical. And I'm not saying that you have to have been an athlete, because there's a lot of great race promoters and producers who weren't necessarily athletes, but I do think it helps. And I do think it allows you to see it through their eyes and make sure that you're hitting everything that could possibly come up in their mind as they move through that process from all the way back from registration on their computer, and then all the way through the finish line, and the awards and whatever, the qualifying roll downs and things like that. It's critical. But that's the last thing I would say is the other thing it's taught me is that it's much more difficult, it's much harder in every way to put an event on, and I don't care if it's a 5K or an Ironman, than it is to do an event. So it really has made me, I always tell people I'm doing penance. I got to benefit from all the amazing race organizers over the years who put on events that I was able to do. So now I'm doing penance. I'm trying to pay that back and put on the best possible event that we can for the athletes that are racing now.
Every time you're picking up a gel pack off the ground, that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's the number one job of any event producer is garbage. And I don't care what level you're at, you're picking up trash at some point.
I've had volunteers tell me this was so much more work than when I was racing.
Way more work. But and the hard part is you guys are still working hard, right? And the tough part is the payback is standing at that finish line and seeing people finish their first ever event and seeing the tears and seeing what it means to them.
That's the joy. That's the joy, right? Yeah.
That's what it's about. So Huddle, for you, not having, because you're still, every single day you're trying to put on events, right? And the finish line keeps moving and you can't put these events on. How hard has it been for you, and how much do you enjoy? Does it make you appreciate when you are able to bring these things to fruition?
Yeah, you don't realize it until it's gone. It's like that old saying, you don't appreciate things until they're taken away from you. And I thought, as excited and thrilled as our athletes were to race in Tempe in Florida, you should have seen the staff. You should have seen all of those contractors who go from race to race to race. And a lot of times you see them at that time of year in the fall when they're all pretty beat up and tired because they've been putting on a lot of events. And you could just see the enthusiasm and the thankfulness to be back doing what we all love to do. And that, not just our staff, not just our contractors, but as Gabriela and Bill have alluded to, the vendors, the folks who set up the traffic control, the tent guys, the toilet guys, everybody, the fence guys. So it's been, that part of it has been a great learning piece as well, is just appreciating what we all are able to do when things are, quote, normal.
And Gabriela, you haven't been able to put on an event yet. So you must be really looking forward to April and actually seeing someone come across the finish line.
I am. The virtual part was, fulfilling in a different way, because you could kind of see people using this as motivation and doing something that, people have been in a funk. There's been so many challenges over the past year that those had some satisfaction, but it's not the same. It is not the same as watching the exhilaration of a face crossing the finish line, of them telling their stories afterward, whether they were fast or slow, or, what happened in transition, how they lost a shoe. And
always a story.
Right. It's all of that. Everybody's got one, and everybody's got one every time. Right. And so being able to see that camaraderie. The other thing that I think we miss, as especially like local race producers in communities that have grown up around this, is that people are friends, but not friends, right? They see each other at races. And so that part of their community has been lacking for a year, because they may not have, one-on-one relationships with some of those people, but they see familiar faces, every race. And so that like second level of, kind of an acquaintance circle has really kind of been gone for a while. And so I think people are excited to see their racing friends, right? And get back to that community.
And for you, Bill, Florida is such a close-knit triathlon community. Seeing all those folks come out to challenge Daytona and being able to re-engage, how special was that for you?
The club participation was absolutely fantastic. We had to do some special things to make sure that they weren't having pig roasts where they backed in two coaches next to each other and put a tarp over the top. So we did have to manage some of those expectations. The camper concept played well into this because it did allow them to get back together. I think that what I think we all have to appreciate going forward is whatever we knew as the past as racing is not coming back. We now have a paradigm shift. And we know that flu season has all but dried up. Why? Because of the masks. We know so many of the medical components to our sport are going to change forever. And I think as an adjunct to that, there were people putting on shoes over the last 2 years who've never had shoes on before, and they're out running, or they're biking, or they're swimming. Whatever it is, it's an outdoor activity. So we can look at this as devastating to an industry, but I believe that we're going to come back stronger with more participants as we engage more types of events than we ever have in the past, because people have changed their lifestyle, because they had to. So are we coming back? You bet. Are the clubs stronger than ever? They're chomping at the bit. Do we have to figure out a way to do that safely? Yes. But at the end of the day, do I truly think that we are going to be a better sport for it, regardless of the local folks or, you know, what we do as feeders and or our longer distance stuff, and then clearly, you know, what Paul does with his group? We're going to be in a better place. That's my naive opinion. But when you look at the bike sales and you look at the shoe sales and, you know, you look at all of those things, it tells you there's more people looking to be outside.
I love it. Hey, thank you all for taking time to chat. And seriously, I had 30 weekends that I didn't know what the hell to do this last year, right? I race 30 times a year and it's driving me crazy. So we need this stuff to come back and come back now. Huge thank you to Paul and Gabriela and my man Bill. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for taking time.
Always a pleasure.
Our next session of the TriSummit is coming up right in a few minutes. It's called Avoiding Injury Upon Your Return, featuring Mark Allen, Andy Potts, and Leslie Patterson, presented by CEP. Stick around. Thanks, you guys, for taking time. Pleasure to chat with all three of you.
As well.
Thanks,
Tell
Bob.
Bob said hello.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
everything.
Thank you, guys.
Enjoy being with you.